so I'll work on that. It'll just mean that I need an earpiece when we do things out of the speakers. So I'm sure I will need some kind of chocolate cake to get through that later. So I'll be careful. All right. Could you imagine, my friends, we're going to spend some time on the slides and some time in the Bible, because I'm sure that I must have some kind of an undiagnosed learning disability, because I've been working on this sermon literally for 2 months, and I just cannot get it to coalesce. And so you're going to help me as we interact together this morning. The Lord's going to teach me something that I really need to know, because I'm writing it for a sermon series that I'm doing in October. All right, so can you imagine, friends, coming to church on Sabbath morning, and you don't have to listen to me talk? Wouldn't that be nice? You get to listen to Jesus talk. Wouldn't that be an amazing Sabbath morning? So heaven's going to be an incredible place. All kinds of testimonies that we're going to hear, all kinds of Sabbaths we're going to spend. And if you could imagine an ancient synagogue where Jesus, I'm not sure whether or not he was the speaker on the particular day that we're speaking of, but this is again James Tissot, one of my favorite artists, and he again portrays that sort of really square feeling that an ancient synagogue would have had. The service is over, there's been teaching and preaching and talking, and as Jesus is leaving, something happened. And you're going to find it in Luke chapter 14. And if you have your tablet or your phone or your onion skin pages, which is what I have today, please make sure it's handy, because we're only going to get just so far in the slides, because I'm just not done yet, but I'm really working on it. All right, and so here we go. He's coming out on a Sabbath morning, and the Bible says this: and it came to pass, as he went into the house of one of the who? Chief priests, to do what? Eat bread on the Sabbath day. And so he was coming out of church like you and I might, and as has happened many a time, the roofs are off in the persons to do it with me, or someone other of you will go, hey Denise, come to our house for lunch. Petersons will do it sometimes. And so this is what happened. Jesus got an invite to Sabbath lunch. Okay? And so that's where he's going, into the house of one of the chief Pharisees. Now, I'm sure that when he got this invitation, that our friend the chief was really smiley and, very pleasant, inviting him home, thanking him for his contributions to the Sabbath morning discussions. But you know that often lurking behind the facade of the leaders of the day were other motives. Would you say that's true? Look a little sleepy. I know it's warm in here. So you can do it. All right, now I want you to know that they wouldn't have been headed, because it's important for you to understand how the story unfolds if you can sort of see the geography, the real estate, literally, of where they're going. They're not going to a common house in the lower parts of perhaps any city of the ancient times, a little square kind of boxy home that looked something like this. That would have been a common home for a person of a lesser social status. This is the kind of home that they're headed for. And they're not headed by themselves. They're headed with a decent entourage of people, other church leaders, other persons who would have been invited, and you'll see that becomes very clear. And when are they doing this, friends? On the Sabbath, because that becomes important to the story. Now, here's where you get the idea of the mixed motive of this lovely, generous Sabbath invitation. What does the Bible say that they, the church leaders, were doing? They were watching him. And the inference in the original language, I just drove past one yesterday, I think. Did you ever see a red-tailed hawk on a telephone wire? Okay, and so he was over a cornfield, and what was he doing? He was watching for what? His prey. Exactly. And that's what the original language infers in this word, watch. They were perched for a pouncing purpose. All right? So, this is kind of interesting because, Jesus had many happier times in the homes of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and other folks that he'd gather around the table and interface with them in a more cheerful manner. We used to do it not far from here. With Annette and Clarence, we'd gather together and have some really good talks and some good food. But that isn't what this is going to be. So the story goes on, Now, if you could imagine this entourage coming into that great courtyard that you saw earlier and sort of making their way into the visiting area and the dining area, and there was someone in the group, and he was very odd to be in the group. The Bible says a man whose body was what? Swollen with fluid. Now, some of your Bibles say that he had a condition, and what do they call the condition? Dropsy. Okay, and so dropsy is edema. Okay, that's what he had. He had edema, a very severe case of edema. So let me ask you a question, friends. What in the world was he doing in the chief Pharisee's house on a Sabbath morning? Say it again. He was looking to be healed. Now, that is often the case. People will show up because Jesus is going to be somewhere, but that's not quite what's going on here. And you'll see it because the language infers that this was a sting. Did you say a setup, right? They set him up because no self-respecting Pharisee on a Sabbath morning is going to let this unclean, malformed individual into his home. Are you with me? All right. A man whose body was swollen with fluid suddenly, oh my, how did he get in? Appeared in front of Jesus. And these are just some ancient mosaics that give you an idea of how people used to perceive it, whether he was swollen in the torso. I don't know if that's just something that was understood in ancient times in ancient medicine, that he only would have been swollen in the torso, because to me, if I had edema, and I get it a little bit every once in a while, I usually get it in my hands and my lower legs and my feet. But we're not quite sure exactly where he was blown up with fluid, but a lot of the ancient paintings show it in the middle of his body. So let me ask you a question, friends. Or I should say, I want you to observe how Jesus asked a question. He did that a lot when he was teaching, because it's something that I actually wrote an email this week to apologize to a colleague, and what I said in my email and my apology was, I made too many statements and I didn't ask enough questions. And so Jesus used questions masterfully, not as an apology because he wasn't clumsy socially like I can be sometimes, but he used questions to teach. And so he said to them, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? Why did he ask this question, friends? Say it again. He knows what they're thinking. He knows exactly what's up. They are looking for a cause to do what? To accuse him, and then to do what? To kill him. Make no mistake. This was something that dogged Jesus' steps every day of his life, of his ministry, I should say, and his life, really. Because when you think about it, friends, Jesus he's been trying to outrun death for how long? Since the manger. Because there was a death decree to take out his life when he was small. And imagine for the rest of his life, if he said where he came from. There weren't any other young men from where he came from, where he was born, because they were all executed. And so if you can imagine, this is something that Jesus had to watch his back all of his life. All right, and so here he is. This is a very poor representation of the table they're sitting around, and I'll show you that in a moment. But here he is, the man with dropsy. And so he asked them, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? And then you're sure that they set him up for the sting by their reply. What is their reply? They don't have one. Because he just read their mind, read their hearts. And he's like, look, I know what you're up to. Now, the thing that's so amazing, we know these stories by heart. We've read them 1,000 times since we were small, if we grew up in the church. It's always good to spend a little time observing Jesus. And he just never lost, he almost never lost his cool. He was just safe in his Father's arms all the time, trusting in the process that was unfolding, praying constantly. And I really, really respect that about him, because my Italian genes make that very difficult most of the time. And so he just doesn't even get into any kind of an argument with them. And having taken hold of him, now we're talking about the man with dropsy, and the language suggests that he actually enfolded him, friends. You know how Jesus is in terms of the social mores around people that are quote-unquote unclean. They never get touched. Nobody wants to come anywhere near them. Well, the original language suggests that in this process, Jesus actually folded him into his arms. Having taken hold of him, he healed him, and then he let go of him. And then he goes back to teaching. And he says, which of you, if your son or an ox fell into a well, would immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? Sheep, your ox, your son. If you'd fallen into a well on the Sabbath day, you would be like up and out. And let me ask you a question, because we have an example from recent history. It's not recent, but it's recent enough for me to remember. Do you remember when little Jessica fell into the well? Right? If that was a Sabbath morning, friends, and that was anywhere near your house, would you have hesitated at all to get out there and feed the folks that were helping, or get your hands dirty, or do whatever? And so here's a modern example of what Jesus is talking about. If that had happened anywhere near us on a Sabbath morning, it's very likely that we would have at least done something to support that effort, regardless of whether or not it was the seventh day. And once again, friends, they could not answer him again to these things. So I don't know about you, but I'm so impressed with how this keeps unfolding, because if it were me, I would have been mad or smug, or I could think of 10 other emotions that would have been inappropriate for me to have in this moment. But Jesus is going to take advantage for good of their villainy. And I don't know about you, but I live in an evil culture. Do you live in an evil culture? I live in an evil, selfish, self-serving, insecure culture. And there's a principle in this story that's so wonderful for us to take away. It's that God took their villainy and he used it for good. Directed by God's Spirit, continuing to work for their souls. And so he says, observing how they chose the first seats at the table, he put forth a what? A parable to those who were invited, saying unto them. So let's get a picture in our heads, friends. How many people do you think are present? A lot. So let's give it a number. All of us. I'm going to let you choose. How many people are present? Trace? 20. 20. Nah, too small. Okay, this is Jesus of Nazareth at the chief Pharisee's house. Tracy's got 20. Do I hear? Full house. All right, so let's say, Tracy, let's add 42 to your number. Let's say there's 62 people jammed into that house. Okay? Some people are standing around, they're on the periphery, on the edges. And so he's talking to a group of people. And he says, when anyone invites you to a wedding banquet, how many of you have ever been to a wedding banquet? Raise your hands, please. Okay, some of you need to get out more. All right? When anyone invites you to a wedding banquet, do not what? Take the best seat. Now, friends, if I go to a wedding reception, I know where the worst seat is. Where's the worst seat? In the back, behind the pillar. Exactly. All right, so I'm not sure that I'm ever looking for the best seat in the house, but I know where the worst seat is, and I don't want to sit there. And so if I have a choice, I don't sit in the back behind the pillar. Although I don't mind sitting in the back because then you sort of get to view everyone who's there and so on. He says, when anyone invites you to a wedding banquet, do not take the best seat, lest perhaps some more honored guest than you may have been asked. Now let's see if we can understand this a little better. This is an actual archaeological excavation of what we're talking about. What are the couches shaped like? Like a U. All right, so this context, this room that they're all dining in is either shaped like a square with a U in it or a square with a square in it. And you'll see what I'm talking about. Now, this is called a triclinium. It's very common in the culture, Greek and Roman culture. So either this is exactly what it looked like, or it was the same idea, only round, in a half circle. All right, but this is basically what used to happen, is that people were reclined. What's the word? The people were reclined. Now, I'm thinking like I get a little indigestion sometimes when I eat, so I couldn't possibly be reclined while I was eating. But this was a very common thing in the ancient world. And you know this because when you read the story of the Last Supper, it tells you this. It says one of the disciples whom Jesus loved was what? Reclining at table at Jesus' side. And so this is what it looked like. If you went to an ancient wedding feast, people were reclined on these lovely comfy pillows, and they were sitting in this big square or this big U, and the servants came through the middle and from the center to serve everyone. Everybody got it? All right. So he says, and the man who invited you, both will come and will say to you, make room for this guest, and then you, ashamed, will move to the lowest place. So let's get the idea that Jesus is talking about. You've come into the banquet hall, and which seat have you taken? In that U, think of the top of the U as the head table. That's where the host and the fancy folks are going to sit. So if you're going to take one of the best seats, where are you going to be? Not in the back. You're going to be as close to the host as you can. Either you're going to be along the top of that U, sitting alongside somebody fancy, or you're going to be right there on the corners, really close to the host. Now, friends, when I first started to study this, as part of a sermon series that I'm doing again in October, I was just like, Lord, I am so clueless as to what this means. Like, what does it mean? And so we're going to unpack it together and see what it means. When you are invited, go and recline where? Where does he want you to sit? Where's the last place? You know, you know how you pull up a chair at the end of a table? So it would be like pull up a pillow at the end of that U and sit at the base of one of the legs. He says, take the last place, recline there, so that when the one who has invited you comes and says, friend, what? Move up higher. Then you will have honor in the sight of all who are at table with you. This is a famous text, right? For all those who exalt themselves will be, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Now remember, friends, Jesus has just taken over the coup. He just took it over. They brought him in there to set him up, to accuse him, and now he has taken over the conversation for his own purposes. Masterful. Is he nasty? Never. Never, never, never. And then he didn't just go, thank you so much, is there any dessert? He said to the one who had, now watch, friends, when he first started talking, he was talking to who? To the entire 62. Now, he's narrowed his focus. What did this man invite him there for? To trap him, to trick him, to harm him. And now he turns to him and he says, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends, or your brothers, or your relatives, or your rich neighbors, or your cousin Vinny. Otherwise, they may also invite you in return, and that will be your repayment. But when you host a banquet, invite who? The poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed. Friends, that's like Jesus is putting that up there. Like, what you really want to pursue is blessing. You want to be blessed. He says you will be blessed because they have nothing to repay you. For it will be recompense to you when? In the resurrection of the righteous. Now, friend, this is not an ancient notion. Okay, Jack Hansen said it this way: the best way to honor relationships is to practice the law of what? Reciprocity. Now, I don't agree with him because Jesus just said that's not the best idea, but it's not just an ancient notion. The law of reciprocity. We have a phrase in modern culture that reflects it a little bit. What's the phrase? That's a good phrase. You scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. That's the law of reciprocity. And so friends, what I want you to understand is that as I prayed through the idea, I'm like, Lord, what is this story about? And all of a sudden the Spirit whispered it in my ear so that I could understand it in modern terms. This story is about the power brokers. And I think that's really important considering where we are in this country right now. And I don't want to get into any kind of a political discussion, but we should be praying for our country and everyone, from those of us who represent our own family all the way to the White House. We should be praying. The law of reciprocity. These are the power brokers. Friends, this is a shame, honor, reciprocal culture, which is very difficult for us to understand. But when this man invited Jesus into his home, he was demonstrating that he was showing him honor. Was he showing him honor? He was not. Okay, so there was just all kinds of mixed, difficult, sinister motives going on in the heart of this man. And the thing that made that challenging is that he's a church leader doing church things for supposedly God's cause. And he's completely convinced, because by the time you get to crucifixion, they say it out loud, it's better that one man should die than the whole nation be harmed. So friends, we have to watch. We cannot make the Pharisees, these large, bulbous-nosed bad guys. This is human nature, that our motives should be mixed and confused. And when it happens in a church setting and a church leadership setting, it harms other people. So let me help you understand the law of reciprocity. Now, whatever your feelings are, it will help you understand. Let's just say that you got invited to Frogmore Cottage to meet Archie. Don't laugh. You get this beautiful gilded invitation, and somebody's going to pay the carbon footprint thing so that you can get on the private jet, and you're going over to Frogmore Cottage, and they are going to treat you to a week of all the best of London and English countryside, and wow! They just drew your name out of a hat. Here's the catch. The expectation will be that you return the invitation. The expectation will be that the kind of treatment that you were given is the treatment that you'll give yourself. That's the law of reciprocity. That's what fueled the power brokers in this culture. So if you were wealthy, if you had title, if you had position, then this whole shame, honor, reciprocal idea, you were the ones who held it in your hands. So the thing that Jesus was saying was radical. He's like, look, invite the poor. Invite the crippled. Remember that man that you just invited? Yeah, invite him. Be a blessing. Get a blessing. Turn culture on its head. Friends, can you think of a couple of things that you could do this week to turn culture on its head? In a good way. That you could be driven by different things than most people are driven by. That you could focus on something else that's kingdom related, where your job wasn't eating up every moment of your life. That you could turn culture on its head. Because that's the kind of radical kingdom life that Jesus is talking about. And we need each other to figure it out. We need the people in our homes, the people that we pray with, the people that we worship with, to help keep us accountable to this idea that weeks and months and years are not going by when we're stepping into a kingdom way of thinking. Are you with me? And one of those reclining with him, having heard these things, said to him, "Blessed is he who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." He missed the whole thing. Because he was thinking back to what Isaiah was talking about. And Isaiah was talking about that great banquet that they're going to have in the sky after the Messiah comes, and all of God's chosen people are going to be gathered around. And Jesus was so incredibly patient because he was like, okay, let's try some more. All right, so Luke 14, where are we? What verse are we in? Let your friends who did not repay you. All right, verse 16. Jesus replied with this story. And to be perfectly frank, friends, it's a little humorous. He has completely taken over as host. A man prepared a great what? Feast. And he sent out many invitations. And when the banquet was ready, he said to his servants, tell the guests, come, and the banquet is ready. Now you have to understand something about an ancient invitation. You get two. First you get the invitation that says, there's going to be a great banquet. Something like this. Isn't that cool? There's going to be a great banquet. And then you wait. You don't know how long it's going to be. There must have been sort of a, general term. Trace, I really will let you pick this time. How long is it going to be? Between the invitation and the actual dinner?
3 weeks.
3 weeks, okay. So it's going to be 3 weeks, and every day for those 3 weeks, you are going to be waiting for what? You're going to be waiting for the thing that says, dinner's ready, everything's been cooked, everything's been prepared, time to go. Now that's a really different culture than the one we live in, right? But, verse 18, they all began doing what? Now friends, if somebody invited you to this, are you going to be making any excuses? I'm glad to hear you say that. Because what Jesus has invited us to is much better than this. And so we've got to stop with our excuses of not entering into kingdom life. And so he says, one said, I just bought a field and I have to inspect it. Do we like that excuse? No, we don't like it because we're not supposed to, right? Please excuse me. Another said, I just bought 5 pairs of oxen and I want to try them out. Please excuse me. Another said, the dog ate my homework. Please excuse me. No, he actually said, I got married. I have a wife, he says, and I can't come. Well, friend, bring your wife. They're on a honeymoon, she says. Okay. So the servant returned and told his master what they had said. His master was furious. Did he take it gracefully? He set all this up. And now, a vast majority of people are like, nah. It's not a priority. Friends, remember where Jesus is sitting. These men and women are entrenched in what they call their church life. And what Jesus is trying to say to them is that it isn't kingdom life. Not all of it, I'm sure we have to pitch, but some of it we do. I don't know how many of us are planning to pray and fast with regard to these meetings, but we have to do that. I have to do that. Because what a beautiful thing, you should show up on somebody's doorstep and something that they've been hoping is true, they realize that somebody else down the block actually believes it. Go quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and invite the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. That's what Jesus said, right? So friends, is this going to be the law of reciprocity? You sure? Are you sure that in your own walk with Jesus that you understand that there is no law of reciprocity? What God gives is lavish. It's huge. We can't return it. There's nothing at Frogmore Cottage that we can duplicate and say, hey, how about this? After the servant had done this, he reported, there's still room for more. Now it's interesting, I want you to notice a word. Master, furious, go, invite, hedges, urge. Okay, so here we go. So his master said, go out into the country lanes, and behind the hedges, who's that, friends? In your culture, who's that? That's the ghetto. That's the homeless. That's the person living under the bridge and sleeping in a cardboard box. And he says, go and urge them to come. Why does he use the word urge?
They don't trust,
Yes, okay? They're not trustful that something's for free, that something's a gift. They feel unworthy, and they cannot practice the law of reciprocity. And so it would be polite and absolutely correct for them to decline. But he's like, no, urge them. And friends, we have got to remember who we are and what we bring. Our hands are empty. And amen that they are. Don't let it keep you from God. Do you know how many times I sit with something like this and I just can't get the pieces to fit together and I feel like a total knucklehead. And I'm like, 54 years old, Denise, get it right. It's never too late to understand how lavish God is.
Amen.
When he wrote out your salvation, he wrote every day, every moment, and he knew what was still going to be a problem. And the word he uses here is urge. He urges you, stop trying to pay me back. Stop trying to prove it. Stop trying to give me some kind of even exchange. Own it. Humble yourself. Take the back seat and you will be blessed.
Amen.
What does he want, friends, at the end of this text as we're done? Why is he sending this servant out and out again? Because what does he want? He wants the house to be full. He wants every seat taken, and the one with your name on it is reserved for you. And he will not be happy unless you are sitting in it. Now watch the very last verse, because it's sobering and we should take it to heart. And Jesus is trying to plead with the very men and women that are surrounding him with all of their cultural norms. And he says, for none of those, what's the next word? Next word. For none of those, He's moved out of the parable and into the reality. You know who I am. I know what you are trying to accomplish. For none of those that I first invited will get even the smallest taste of what? Of my banquet. That quote from Isaiah, he's taking it on for himself. He's declaring himself gently once again before this host. And friends, I don't know what it is about us, but we just have a tendency to separate ourselves somehow. And what we must remember is that we too have called ourselves chosen. And we should. But that requires more humility. That requires more grace. That requires more of God's powerful Spirit to keep us in exactly that place where we'll knock on doors, where we'll keep wrestling with the Word, so that God can give us all that He plans for us to have. He wants to. He wants His house to be full. Your place and our neighbor's place is reserved. So stand with me, because there's no way that we can get that done or experience that without powerful, powerful, powerful God who died to make it possible. So let's sing together as we close. I promise you that at some future time, I will finish this. Father, that's the nearness that Jesus was talking about. That's the seat that he wants us to take. With our neighbors, with our co-workers, with our families, with our spouses, with our children, he wants us to take the lowest place, to humble ourselves, to be graceful and giving. But in so doing that, the text says that we are blessed. And that means that we are near to your heart, even if we're sitting in the last seat, in the last row, in the corner. So Father, in this culture of mine, this entitled, push and pull, gotta have it now culture, teach us to be graceful and grace-filled. Teach us to confront with kindness as Jesus did. Teach us to speak with wisdom as Jesus did. And Lord, we pray for this effort that's coming up in our neighborhood, in our county. Lord, bless Tom. Give him power. Give him thoughts. Give him an inspiration that comes from totally outside of himself. And then make him your vessel. Because, Lord, I know there are people in this world that they believe that believing in you makes them backward or subjects them to being called backward or bigoted or some crazy thing. But you are the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and you are so humble that sometimes it's hard to see you. But we see you. We ask that you would infuse us and forgive us and empower us and claim us as your own. In Jesus' name.